Welcome back. Well, let's update you on one of the developing stories today. Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Dmytrov, Kuleba, downplaying suggestions that his visit to our country is part of a charm offensive. He met with our International Relations Minister, Naledi, Pandor, for what's been described as a political consultation. Our senior political reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, was there. She joins us now. Ziyanda, good afternoon to you. A lot going on. Naledi Pandor speaking to the media, I think, for the first time since the announcement from Cabinet that, in fact, we have instructed our ambassador to Israel to come back for consultations. That's obviously a diplomatic signal that's being sent there. What did she say about that?
So I must correct you there, because we haven't had an ambassador to Israel for since 2018, I think it is. But the diplomats who were there, obviously assisting South Africans with logistics and everything else, have been recalled. She says it's par for the course when there is such a situation as we're seeing unfolding in Gaza, where they need to get an assessment of what's taking place in the region, whether South Africa can provide any assistance, and whether or not the relations, of course, because it's diplomatic and it's about relationships, whether or not the relationship is sustainable at this point in time. I think that was quite, apt for the minister to speak about. She also then lashed out quite strongly against the Israeli ambassador to South Africa for their recent remarks, Mr. Eliav, to say, well, there's this new tendency of some diplomats or ambassadors to South Africa of saying whatever they feel like, and it says they're akin to the comments that were made by U.S. Ambassador to South Africa, Ruben Brigitte, when he accused Pretoria of loading arms bound for Russia to continue that war invasion in Ukraine, saying that it's simply just baseless and without evidence. So quite a lot of moving parts, and that was also taking place in the context of the questions that Ukraine's a foreign affairs minister was being asked about, is this a charm offensive by the Ukraine now that there's this new war that the whole world is now paying attention to? But he quite frankly said, well, the media attention may no longer be on their war, which started on the 24th of February 2021, last year, I should say, but political attention still remains. So also reflecting on that African peace mission that's being led by 7 African leaders, and also mentioning quite specifically the conversations that have been taking place between President Zelensky and Ramaphosa.
I mean, it must be interesting because presumably the Ukraine has always welcomed the African Leaders' Peace Initiative. Russia did too formally and publicly. And yet, unfortunately, it seems on the battlefield it's still very much a stalemate. And I realize in Ukraine itself, the use of that word's become a very difficult phrase to use as well.
Yes. And I think he, Mr. Dmytrov was quite clear that for them this war is still important. And he even went as far as saying that no one feels the pain of the people in the Middle East than those who are civilians living in the Ukraine. You'll know that they've also been criticized, for their response, seemingly taking sides in this Israel-Hamas war. But he explained that their foreign policy position is nuanced. He says it's threefold. One, the attack on Israeli civilians by Hamas should be condemned. Two, that humanitarian aid and all civilian lives should be protected. And three, maintaining that they believe that a two-state solution is the best option for, long-lasting peace and justice. So saying that, remember they abstained during that UN General Assembly votes, which many said, they may be losing the support then of the global South. So reflecting quite sharply on those aspects.
It's interesting because Ukraine has been the sort of lead story in sort of international bulletins for us and everybody else until this round of the conflict in the Middle East started. So, yes, he can claim that there's still political support, but I don't know if Ukraine has the support of the West that it did before this. The Middle East is difficult for them to manage. They rely, as we all know, on the United States, which is an ally of Israel. To add to the complexity, Iran is supplying weapons to Russia, which is attacking them. So, I mean, there's layers upon layers in this.
Layers upon layers, and interestingly enough, our very own minister went to Iran recently, and it would seem that behind the scenes there were talks about, because apparently the Iranian minister was supposed to come to South Africa, but the timing, as you've mentioned, of everything that's taking place with Israel and Hamas and Iran supplying weapons to Russia and, Ukraine being linked to the United States, the timing wouldn't have been apt, especially since last week we were hosting the AGOA summit, and especially since, Africa African countries have come under immense pressure to actually take a stance. South Africa, you'd know, our stance of being non-aligned actually became a political football, and there was criticism against, the International Criminal Court. In fact, Ukraine's foreign minister also reflected on that to say that it's a legal instrument and that it should be respected. So I think it was a well-managed dialogue, and certainly slamming claims that the Ukraine is only now looking to have relations with Africa. He's been to 12 countries and says they're trying to revitalize that. They'll be opening up embassies. But I think the context of everything that's happening now with, our own diplomats being recalled and mounting pressure really for the Israeli ambassador to South Africa to be recalled, I think there's a lot of complexities and nuance to what was happening today.
Interesting timing for the visits as well. I mean, as you say, it's a lot going on in all of these sectors. We just finished the AGOA summit.
Yeah.
Then, of course, there's the decision announced today by Cabinet about withdrawing our diplomatic officials from Israel. And then on top of all of this, we have the Ukrainian foreign minister. I mean, suddenly, I suppose this is happening for many countries. Everyone's talking to everyone again.
Yes, and this is exactly it. So I was one of those that posed the question about the timing. And to quote him verbatim, he said it's not a time-driven, kind of event. They've been planning this visit for a while. Ukraine has been investing in Africa for a long time. In fact, this visit isn't just limited to bilateral relations with South Africa, but also about the African continent, even reflecting then on the African continental free trade area, which was part of the discussions last week at the AGOA summit. So we'll also be hearing tomorrow, Stephen, from Dr. Naledi Pandor, because she will be making a formal statement at the National Council of Provinces when she's taking questions in that platform tomorrow regarding the Israel-Hamas war. And that's going to be very pertinent because we already know that MPs are going to be asking her whether she's tabled a motion for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador to South Africa. And that's something that she's been speaking about, in management of international relations. You have to make a move that will be most impactful, but not one that is based on emotions or taking a particular side, which basically underpins how South Africa has always approached its international relations and foreign policy.
Very complicated. Senior political reporter Ziyanda, thank you very much indeed. Do appreciate it.